Good afternoon, everybody. You know that if you ask an average sports fan to name a boxer from before 1930, the only name that's going to come up regularly is Jack Dempsey? And that's understandable because, he stood alongside Babe Ruth and Charles Lindbergh as symbols of the Roaring Twenties. They were the first men to have their accomplishments preserved on film, so we have an actual visual record of who they were. But before Dempsey, and bridging the gap from ragtime to the Jazz Age, bridging the gap from the bare-knuckled fighters of the late 1800s through to the gloved heavyweight championships of the 19-teens, were a series of heavyweight champions, and one man stood out head and shoulders above all of them, literally and figuratively. And that's James Jackson Jeffries. He was a modern athlete in a bygone time, retired undefeated, and would have gone down as one of the top heavyweights of all time had he not been lured out of retirement to fight Jack Johnson and forever be attached to the moniker the Great White Hope. But there's a lot more to James J. Jeffries than just the Great White Hope. And that's what we're going to explore today. We're going to look at the first great fight of the 20th century, but from James Jeffries' perspective. Who was he and what kind of accomplishments did he have? Hi, I'm the 100 Proof News Hound, and we're here with another episode of the 100 Years and More Show. Remember to like and subscribe. It's very important for the development of the channel. So let's jump in and see who James J. Jeffries is. Well, first and foremost, he was an athlete. And this is what's unusual. He's a fine athlete who just happens to go into boxing. In his prime, he stood all of 6'2", and he fought at around 225 pounds, solid muscle. He was the size of a modern middle linebacker. He in high school ran the 100-yard dash in 10.9, which isn't world-class sprinter speed, but it's pretty good middle linebacker's speed. And he could high jump 5'11", and that's with that crazy scissor kick, not with the modern Fosbury flop. Try, see how high you can jump doing that scissor kick. In any event, when you compare him to modern heavyweights, just in terms of stature, he stacks up quite well. He's actually slightly bigger than the most feared fighter of the 1960s, Sonny Liston. He's an inch taller and about 10 pounds heavier than Sonny was, and he was actually just about the exact same size as our current undefeated heavyweight champion, Alexander Usyk. He was among the first, what accounted for his physique, he was among the first boxers to train with weights, but not static lifting, bench press, deadlift, squat, none of that. He used pulleys and weights to create tension, putting his muscles through natural movements to build up only the muscles necessary for boxing. Turned him turned his physique into something to behold. But it also allowed him to have the flexibility and the endurance to fight, well, you're going to see 25-round fights. And when you stack him up, if you just take him as a man and put him into a modern NFL locker room, he would look absolutely in place. He'd be somewhere between a tight safety and a middle linebacker in size, and with the same muscle mass and everything. He's the most modern-looking pre-1900 person you're probably ever going to encounter. Now, where'd he come from? He's born in Ohio in 1875, but him and his family come out to California when he's just 7 years old. He stays in school till he's 17. Then he takes off. He starts apprenticing as a Boilermaker, and he's gonna keep that nickname throughout his life as the Boilermaker. But he also gets involved in copper mining. He's doing really manly things in a manly way. He gets in some scraps at the mining camp and finds out that he's a pretty good boxer and a great wrestler too. But why not channel that into something productive? And he gets involved in boxing, first at the amateur level, then at the professional level. Fights a series of amateur fights and then decides to turn pro at the age of 21 in 1896. And the San Francisco Chronicle publishes an article for, it's hard to believe that they would spend all this space on a 21-year-old person who's only had, at this point in time, 2 or 3 professional fights. Here we go. The San Francisco Chronicle, May 22nd, 1896. Young giant from the South, 6 feet and more of beautifully muscled humanity out for honors. Jeffries, the young Californian giant who is an aspirant for the world's pugilistic champion. And they got a series of drawings outlining his muscles. It's almost an erotic, you'll see. Here's what it says here. It says here, muscled like a bodybuilder with a frame like a youthful Hercules and quick-footed as a cat, James Jeffries is put forward by his sponsor, Billy Gallagher, as a man who will sometime be champion of the world. It says here, his training has been with a view to results of quickness, force, and velocity of movement, instead of with a view to devise such movements as would develop particular muscles. He's not a bodybuilder. He doesn't want to look like Arnold. He wants to be flexible and strong. It says here, While the developed muscle is necessary for a good fighter, it is not the only thing necessary. Ability to hit hard and hit quick and to hit true is necessary. Gallagher says his protege excels in all these particulars. It says here, Jeffries is a clever scientific boxer. His training in this line began early in life and has been kept up with in a commendable steadiness ever since. It says Jeffries has fought not a few men and has won every battle he has had. Says Jeffrey is a perfect picture of physical manhood. He stands 6'2" and is splendidly proportioned. His feet are well shaped and not too large, with a springing arched instep that ensures firmness, lightness, and agility. I'm stunned that they're commenting on this man in this detail. It's kind of like they're describing Secretariat before the Belmont. It says here, his ankles are well turned, bones not too heavy, and with ligaments firmly attached to the muscles. Well, I'd hope so. He'd be flopping all over the place. But anyways, after that 3-page anatomical analysis of James Jeffries, they pronounce him fit to eventually challenge for the heavyweight championship of the world. Now, in his fourth fight as a professional, the Los Angeles Times of April 10th, 1897 reports that Jeffries is clever, wipes out Van Buskirk in 2 rounds. The big fellow from Los Angeles, too big game for the Olympic Club's star boxer. He patterns himself after Corbett, and the Corbett is James J. Corbett, gentleman Jim Corbett. He was the other big titan of the early gloved boxing, and it was rumored. Well, at some point in around 1895, 1896, James Jeffries served as Corbett's primary sparring partner, and it was rumored that Jeffries knocked him out in a sparring session, and actually Corbett admitted to that about 20 years later. It says here, James Jeffries, aspirant for championship honors, whose chief claim to distinction in the pugilistic world is based on his having been Jim Corbett's chief boxing partner. They note that then they go to the fight. The contest was brought off by the National Club, and between 5,000 and 6,000 people were in attendance. So even at that point in time, they're drawing big crowds. Jeffrey has adopted Corbett's style of fighting as nearly as any man can. He allowed Van Buskirk to do the forcing, showing much cleverness in ducking and hitting in the breakaway. So he would allow the other man to come forward. He'd counterpunch and punch off the clinch. He was especially effective with his right in the breakaway, scoring repeatedly on his opponent's face and jaw, cutting a deep gash over Van Buskirk's eye in the first round. You're going to see, and I think it has to do with the gloves, you're going to see that there's a lot more cuts back here in the 1890s into the 1900s than there are presently. The gloves, when you look at photographs, they aren't exactly the same kind of gloves. Some of them, they're as little as 5 ounces. They're more like MMA gloves, and they have to, and if you're fighting 10 or 20 rounds with those kind of gloves, you're going to split some skin here. It says the blow which put Van Buskirk out was a right-hand cross squarely on the jaw. Van Buskirk turned completely around and fell like a log on his face. He was counted out before he could get to his feet. So he's on his way. Jeffries is on his way and being recognized as one of the good young heavyweights. He fights a tough fight against Tim Sharkey, and he'd fight another tough rematch with him years later. But his 12th fight puts him in a position to challenge for the heavyweight championship. It says here, Jeffrey moves up. It's the Los Angeles Times article, May 7th, 1898. Near the top of the ladder of fistic fame. He best Sailor Sharkey, the Tom Sharkey, everyone had nicknames back there, in 20 rounds and literally brought down the house. 20 rounds might seem like a lot, but that wasn't even a big deal back then. The 15-round standard limit for heavyweight title fights and title fights of all nature didn't start till the end of the 1920s, the mid-1920s. So in the earlier times, from 1890 through to 1919, it was not unusual for a fight to be scheduled between 25 and 45 rounds. 25 sort of settled in as the standard championship fight. It says here, Jim Jeffries, the big California boxer, won what is considered the last semifinal in the heat for the championship of the world. He fought Tom Sharkey, the hard-headed sailor, through 20 rounds and outfought him in every round. While he did not succeed in putting his doughty adversary to sleep, he had him in a state of distress at least half a dozen different times. So he wins on a decision, and he's off to challenge for the championship. As an aside, one crazy thing happened during this fight. There was a noise in the back of the auditorium. There's about 7,000 or 8,000 people seated there, and they notice there's a noise, and it sounds like some chairs are falling, and they ignore it. But then, in 5 minutes, the entire west section of the seats, about 500 in number, began falling, and row followed row, with people in the seats, coming down in the form of a vast cataract with a great roar that brought the crowd to its feet with fright. It says here, it appeared miraculous that no one was seriously injured, as the rear rows of seats fell at least 12 feet. Gotta build those things a little more solid. We should go back and review my Stadium Mania film. It gives in great detail of what was going on in the development of arenas at that point in time. Now, he was popular enough that they sought his opinion out with respect to what the present state of the heavyweight division. Here's the Los Angeles Times article, October 30th, 1898. It says, James J. Jeffries of Los Angeles is here from Los Angeles. Makes sense. He says his trip is merely for pleasure. He's accompanied by several friends. I do not expect to be able to fight McCoy, he said, because I have not been able to get him to come to the coast. I should like nothing better than to meet him or anybody else of standing for that matter. He's going to take on all comers. I consider myself the equal, if not superior, of any heavyweight, and I am keeping myself in good condition all the time and am ready to fight whenever and wherever a match can be arranged. It says here, Jeffrey seems to be in the pink of condition with a clear eye and good color. Again, they're treating him like he's Secretariat. He's certainly a magnificent specimen of manhood, and not to make a good fight. Yeah, he's a good-looking guy. That goes without saying. In a similar vein, we have the headline from the Los Angeles Times of January 13th, 1899. Put up or shut up. Jeffries will fight anybody if he'll deposit cash. The way fights were funded back then is different than they are now. Now everybody just gets a big cut of a giant pie. Back then, they were kind of like stake matches. You'd have backers, the other guy would have backers, you'd put the money up, you would sign a particular contract for a certain guarantee, perhaps a percentage of the gate. Well, in any event, what it said here was that Jeffries telegraphed his manager a sweeping challenge. He says Sharkey is entitled to rest, but he will fight him under any terms he wants to name. And then he said if Fitzsimmons, and that's Robert Fitzsimmons, still refuses to defend his alleged championship pretensions, I am prepared to meet James Corbett, Kid McCoy, or Peter Maher. First come, first serve, or all of them within as short a time as they may indicate. Take them on one right after the other. My desire is to fight and not to be engaged in a long newspaper discussion. I will go east to train as soon as any one of these gentlemen named shows a disposition to fight by depositing cash. Cash on the barrelhead. I'll fight if you've got the money. And you're going to find James J. Jeffries, if anything, he's a capitalist. He's in this thing to make money and to have a good career. And, well, let's see what happens. Now, he's about to fight Bob Fitzsimmons. Fitzsimmons is a smaller fighter. He's about 6 foot, 180. He's held the light heavyweight championship before, but he's fighting up here in the heavyweight. The headline is Hard Work is Done. Jeffries and Fitzsimmons training less. The Californian is in fine fashion and sends word to his friends on the coast that he's confident. San Francisco betting on the Los Angeles man, but the knowing ones put their faith in Fitz. So the West Coast is backing Jeffries, and the Sharpies and the Damon Runyon types are putting their money on Fitzsimmons. It says here, Jim Jeffries looks fit enough to fight for his life. He has ended his training for his battle for the championship of the world with Bob Fitzsimmons, and his physical condition is as nearly perfect as care, excellent handling, and hard work can make it. It also says, gee, they like this guy. He is tanned up to a swarthy Spanish brown. Like that matters, but he's working a good tan. It says these things almost get a little much. Every ounce of superfluous flesh has been worked from his massive body and splendid arms and legs, and his great muscles stand out in impressive relief. He is activity itself, and if he goes down before the blows of the wonderful man whom he is to face Friday night, they will not be because he has neglected the remarkable opportunities with which nature endowed him. Wow, that's one heap of praise. It says here, the hardest thing the trainers of Jeffries had to do is to limit his training, because he's such a madman trainer, working out with the weights and the pulleys and the medicine balls. He also says here he almost killed himself. He went on a 12-mile run in 97-degree heat and knocked him down for a day, so they're trying to shut him down. And how's Fitzsimmons training? Well, the same thing. He trained hard, but it's the last couple days before the fight. So it says here, at the Bath Beach quarters, Fitz took things easy during the forenoon, contenting himself with light practice, throwing the medicine ball, and a short aggressive session with the punching bag. In the afternoon, Bob sparred 6 rounds with Kennedy, Everhart, and Hickey. The glove work was more more playful than earnest, and it was just sufficient to keep the champion's muscles in thorough condition. So they're fighting. Fitzsimmons the champ, Jeffries is the challenger. They're fighting for the heavyweight championship of the world. Here's the article, Los Angeles Times, June 10th, 1899. Says here, Jeffries a kingpin, knocks out Fitzsimmons in the 11th round. The Los Angeles pugilist proved to be a wonder and kept up an invincible jabbing at the former champion. So he's the champ, he's the man. How'd the fight go, though? Big Jim Jeffries of Los Angeles is the champion pugilist of the world. At the Coney Island Athletic Club, of which I did not know existed, tonight he has defeated Bob Fitzsimmons in a fast and vicious contest that went 11 rounds. He fought with the coolness and precision of a veteran, and at no time was he in danger of meeting with defeat. It was a fair and square contest marked by brilliant display of science on both sides and was fairly and squarely won. With respect to the knockout, it's noted that Jeffries stood over the prostrate form of his bleeding and unconscious opponent. He looked fit to go another hour. You can't be in too good a shape in boxing, especially in the late 1800s. Now, I've always said that a guy's really made it when people are using his likeness and image to make some money. And here we have it, the Los Angeles Times, an ad Saturday, June 10th, 1899, from Nicol the Tailor at 134th South Spring Street. I looked at 134 South Spring Street, where the Los Angeles Times building stood for about 50 years. It says here, all those who won on Jeffries, okay, you've placed your bets and you won on Jeffries, come right down and get another good run for your money. Those who lost on Fitzsimmons, come along too and get down on the winner. So what you're supposed to do is take the money you won on Jeffries, come on down and we'll make you a suit. Now, to make money between championship fights, Jeffries did what many boxers have done over time. He put on exhibitions. Here we have the Los Angeles Times article of July 16th, 1899, titled The Men Who Slugged. Jeffrey boxes in Oakland. It says here, James Jeffries boxed 4 rounds at the Reliance Club last night with his brother Jack. The champion was given a most enthusiastic reception, and in response to calls for a speech, he assured the large audience that he would do everything possible to keep the championship in America where it belonged. Because you had some guys, there were some Englishmen that were lurking around, and a Canadian, Tommy Burns. There were some guys from other countries at that time, but he's going to try to keep it American. He needs a tune-up fight. He fights after winning the championship. He fights Tom Sharkey in another tough fight. But then in preparation for his next big match, which is against gentleman Jim Corbett, he fights a guy named Finnegan. And the Detroit Free Press puts forward one of the more interesting articles that I've ever seen with respect to boxing. Headline, On Again, Off Again, Finnegan. It says, champion Jeffries put the Pittsburgh man away in the second. The reason I'm actually putting this in here is because he put him away in seconds. He put him out in 55 seconds. It's the fastest knockout in the history of the heavyweight championship. It says, located his solar plexus after 3 knockdowns. And what happened here, this is good. We'll read this here. Finnegan looking pale and in anything but good physical condition. Next appeared esquired by his manager. When he stripped, it was evident that his training had been done in the mind only, as he had the front of an alderman. That's how the physique he had, the physique of an alderman. Finnegan doubtless reasoned that it would be time wasted to train, as he could not expect to last the limit, although the end might have been prolonged a little bit had he been in better shape. Then they described the fight. Jeffries knocked him down with 3 lefts. 1 to the head, goes down. 3 knockdowns with the head. When he comes up, he's guarding his head. So Jeffries took advantage of this opportunity and whipped his powerful left to the stomach, that blow ending the bout. Finnegan was badly hurt, but struggled to his feet at the count of 10, only to sink back against the ropes with a look of agony on his face. So I guess the tale of that is, don't fight Jim Jeffries unless you're really good. So he fights gentleman Jim Corbett. Gentleman Jim Corbett is known as the man who beat the man. The original man was John L. Sullivan, who was the last bare-knuckled heavyweight champion. Then he was the first gloved heavyweight champion. And gentleman Jim Corbett beat him, so he was the man who beat the man. But now Jeffries beats him, and he's the man because, according to the Los Angeles Times, May 12, 1900, Jeffries is winner. But Corbett made him bleed aplenty. Knockout came in 23rd round. Best heavyweight fight ever seen in a New York club. It says here that in the point of boxing skill, generalship, and blows of every description and speed, Corbett, while he lasted, made Jeffries look like a lumbering amateur. But Jeffries had the strength to stand all the rapid jabs that were fired into his face, even though they drew the blood from his nose and mouth. And when Corbett began to tire, the big Boilermaker, with a tremendous rush, wore him down and finally dropped him with a punch to the jaw. The knockout came unexpectedly. It was the result of boring tactics. This fight against Corbett reminds me of the first Ali Frazier fight, 1971 in Madison Square Garden, when Ali was coming back after 3 years of rust, not fighting for 3 years, and Frazier was able to knock him down in the late rounds and win the fight. This is kind of what we're dealing with here. That's kind of the fighter that Corbett was. Because of the immense amount of bleeding in this fight, there was speculation for the longest time that gentleman Jim wasn't being much of a gentleman, that he had wrapped his hands, instead of just tape, had wrapped his hands in plaster of Paris. So he basically had rocks for hands. But what they actually think happened is they think that he may have removed even as much much as half of the padding from his gloves, making each individual punch much more powerful, and sort of like delivering punches like you might in an MMA fight. Either way, the ringside folks thought that the amounts of cuts and bleeding in this particular fight was extremely unusual. Then he's defending his next fight, which is the 21st fight of his career. He's going to fight Robert Fitzsimmons. Los Angeles Times, Saturday, July 26, 1902. Jeffries wins in 8th round. Old man Fitz makes a gallant fight and causes the champion to bleed. Loses as Corbett lost. Same sort of thing. Cuts up. He's got great boxing skills. He's able to deliver blows to the face and slice up Jim Jeffries a bit. But Jeffries just continues on. And as they say here, the championship fought between Jim Jeffries at Los Angeles and Bob Fitzsimmons of New York seemed to be a fairly even battle up to and through the 7th round. The knockout blow was a solar plexus punch delivered by a left swing in Fitz's corner just as he was turning to escape a rush. So it's the same kind of punch he knocked out Finnegan with. He's such a powerful puncher that if he does actually hit the solar plexus, one of what they refer to now as a liver shot, it can be immobilizing and result in the end of the fight, which it did in this instance here. But Jeffries went through a lot to get to that point. It says, Jeff received much punishment, especially in the nose and mouth. He bled in the first round, and from that time on, his face was never free from blood during the fight. But it was evident that the only distress he was being caused because he was swallowing blood. So he was bleeding so much he actually had to deal with the swallowing of his blood. It says it was evident to any expert who watched the fight that no matter what force Fitz put into his blows, they could not seriously phase the champion. So Fitzsimmons just didn't have the power to knock out the bigger man, and Jeffries was able to carry the day. The referee, in consultation with a couple people at ringside, said it was the finest fight they had ever seen, and that while old Fitz was beaten, it was a defeat which would have been an honor to any man in the ring. Fitz was cheered when he left the ring, and many went to his locker room to congratulate him. It did the beaten man good to see the signs of appreciation. So there's a rematch. His next fight's a rematch with gentleman Jim Corbett, and he carries the day again. Jim Jeffries, an easy winner. Los Angeles Times, August 15th, 1903. Champion manifest decided superiority over James J. Corbett, knocks him out in the 10th round. This is interesting for the analysis. There's a lovely photograph of the boxers, of the individual participants, as well as a nice drawing of the ring. But they tell the whole story here, the whole story of the fight by way of a cartoon in 1903. And I'll just show you. We've got the cartoon up now. There's a series of five frames, and in the top left, it's Corbett's left was always in evidence. Then the next one is count one for me, says Jeff with a solid body punch. Then when they mix things up, that's the one here with the arms flailing. Then when Corbett was getting in his footwork, Corbett was a very quick man and was difficult to hit. But finally, it was all over but the shouting, showing Corbett being knocked to the canvas. Gotta find fighters to fight. You can't make money unless you find fighters, and Jim Jeffries is running out of fighters. The headline in the Los Angeles Times, Saturday, August 27th, 1904 says, when Jeff chews gum, something is going to drop and drop hard. Last night, it was a miner from Butte. Said Monroe lasted only 1 round and a half. Says the 20-round fight tonight at Mechanics Pavilion for the heavyweight championship of the world between Jim Jeffries and Jack Monroe was one of the worst farces ever seen in a San Francisco ring. Well, that's not much of a recommendation. Even the men who had poor opinions of Monroe thought he would last 5 rounds because of his size and great strength, but the fight ended in the first half of the second round as referee Graney gave the decision to Jeffries, who had Monroe absolutely at his mercy, and as Graney said, could easily have killed him with one of his terrific right-hand punches. Just proves James Jeffries is a dangerous man. Again, do not get into the ring with this man unless you are highly skilled. So there we are, 1904. He's been champion for 5 years. He's fought everybody. He's beaten everybody. He's beaten the best of the guys at least twice. He's undefeated at this point in time, 19 wins and 2 draws. What's left to do? One of the things that he decides to retire, one of the things that makes it easy is that he's that most rare beast. He's a boxer who's actually good with money. Remember, he's been making $30,000, $40,000 a fight for years now. And that $30,000 to $40,000 a fight, that's basically $1 million in today's money. And you know how much money that is after tax? That million is after tax? $1 million! Because they don't have income tax until 1913, so he gets to keep all the money. He buys a big farm in Burbank. He begins buying land in the metropolitan Los Angeles area, and he's buying in 1904. 1904. But you know what that land's worth by 1950s? By the 1950s, well, it's a lot. Ask Bob Hope and any of the stars in the 50s from the 30s and 40s who were buying land in the Los Angeles basin. Now, he became a farmer. He became a stock breeder. He promoted like cows. He promoted fights. He even got into early motion pictures, both in promotion and acting. He basically became a squire. He was well known in Southern California, charitable and business circles, sporting circles. He was just an all-around celebrity and also an all-around good businessman. And that should have been the end. If he had just retired then, gone into his squiredom, he'd have gone down as one of the top 5 heavyweights in the history of the heavyweight division, no doubt. He'd have gone down just like Marciano. He'd have been an undefeated heavyweight, dominating his era, but they wouldn't let him go because something happened. In 1908, Jack Johnson, a black man, defeated Tommy Burns, a Canadian. Well, before 1908, there was a colored line. It wasn't written in stone, but it was respected. A white heavyweight fighter, just couldn't fight a black heavyweight fighter. At least that was the line. And when Jack Johnson beat Tommy Burns, there were a lot of whites that just couldn't handle that. The call went up to the only guy that they thought was out there that could possibly beat Jack Johnson, and that was Jim Jeffries. And it came with the moniker, the Great White Hope, something which James Jeffries tried to live down for the rest of his life. You know, it's not that James Jeffries was a racist or any more racist than any 1900 a fellow from the 1900s on the West Coast of the U.S. You know, most racism in the West Coast of the U.S. at that point in time was anti-Asian. We've dealt with that in several episodes here. And as a matter of fact, he had fought, according to the Los Angeles Times, the May 22, 1896 edition, he had fought Frank Childs, the colored Cyclone, and the current holder at that time of the colored heavyweight championship. He had fought him and beat him back in 1896. So he would fight a black fighter, but the money, but he had retired. He didn't want to return, but the money was just too good. They offered him it was for a variety of guaranteed contract between $100,000 and $125,000. That's somewhere between $3 and $4 million after tax today, and he just couldn't resist it. The capitalist in him just couldn't resist it. And so here he comes back to try to fight. But he's got a problem. 2 problems, actually. Hasn't fought in 6 years. Who the heck can give up 6 years? You saw in 1971 how rusty Muhammad Ali was, and he'd given up 3 years, and he was only 30 at the time when he came back. He's coming back at 36, having not fought in 6 years. And most importantly, the 225 pounds of rippling muscle that was there in 1904 was now 325 pounds of mostly fat in 1909. He had to lose 100 pounds. And through his dedication and hard work, he did it. He got back down to 225. But the problem is that when you lose weight on that magnitude, you don't just lose fat, you lose muscle. And it's usually in a ratio of about 4-1. So he would have lost 80 pounds of fat, but also 20 pounds of muscle. So he's lost probably a quarter of his muscle mass in losing all of that weight. And so he said not only is he 6 years older and rusty, he's only a shell of the man that he was before. He may still look fit, but he's nowhere near the fellow he was 6 or 7 years ago. Can't be. And now he's fighting a guy at the top of his game, a 30-year-old at the absolute top of his game. Well, how do you think that turned out? Well, here we go. We got the prelude. They're going to fight in Reno, Nevada in front of 20,000 people. We have the San Francisco Bulletin of July 4th, 1910. 2 fighters on edge for tap of the gong this afternoon. It says, fight fills call for red blood. Pugilist ready for gong. The supporters of Jeffries say he's right on edge for the fight, and the supporters of Johnson say he looks to be in the best condition. Headline, San Francisco Bulletin, Tuesday, July 5th, 1910. Johnson knocks out Jeffries in the 15th round. Weak opponent. Former champion, no match for big pugilist. And the thing is, Jack Johnson wasn't that big. He was 6'1.5", so maybe 6'1" on a good day, 200 pounds. He wasn't big even by the standards of the day, but it's funny when you look back and read the articles, they're always referring to him as a giant, but he was a good inch shorter than Jeffries. It says, confident smile turns to lines of deep bitterness. In white man's grief lay brutality of contest. And this is one of the great sporting columns that I've seen in the last year or so. San Francisco Bulletin, July 5th, 1910. Says here, come back, there's no such thing. Says, the old story. It was pathos of years too far advanced. It was too brutal. Come back, there is no such thing. If you'd seen Jeffries, the man whose name stood for rock-like invulnerability, sinking, sinking, sinking. If you had seen that huge, proud bulk falling through the ropes, if you had seen that great, rugged face yesterday, and then today bruised and beaten. But that was not the worst of it. Working with the enormous bitterness of defeat as he left the arena, there lay the brutality in that bitterness. It says here, he faced Johnson. With respect to the pre-fight, how he looked pre-fight, he'll contrast pre and post. He faced Johnson and he smiled. The confidence of kings shook from his steady face. The proud smile of an unbeaten man. He walked out into the ring center. His very stride was regal. It was the only word which I can think. It says, for 15 ugly rounds he tasted the bitterness of blows, and he had not one to give. For 15 rounds until his arms were like lead, and he could strike no more. Then the black arm flew out like a striking snake, like a thick, dark python striking down its prey, and it was over. And then in one of the finest little chunks of prose, says here, Jeffries never ready. Jeffrey was not ready. At no stage of the game was he ready. He was always looking for something which was not there, for an opening. And he faced this Frankenstein, this marvelous, perfectly adjusted machine of flesh and blood and bone and nerve. Johnson had everything: speed, science, strength. He was horrible in his perfection. That's a great term, eh? He was horrible in his perfection. That's how good he was that day. Well, that was it for Jeffries as a boxer. But the crazy thing was that was also pretty much it for Johnson as a boxer. And nobody goes into this, so let's go into it. Johnson retains the heavyweight championship of the world in 1910. Between 1910 and 1916, he fights a series of opponents, of stiffs, of bums, nobodies. He fights a series of guys, and I believe all of them white, because he respected the color line, even if Jeffries didn't. He fights a whole series of boxers, I guess, just to get a payday. And then he fights the only boxer who he fought after Jeffries of any consequence. He fights Jess Willard in 1916 in Havana, Cuba, and gets knocked out in the 23rd round. So the last good fighter he fought and beat in his entire career was when he was 30 years old, fighting James Jeffries. And when he fought Willard, he was basically the same age that Jeffries was when he fought him, and he was knocked out. And remember, the Willard is the one who 3 years later, is the fighter 3 years later who Jack Dempsey's almost going to kill in the ring in the most vicious beating ever taken by a heavyweight fighter. So that was it. It was the swan song for Johnson and for Jeffries. But things turned out better for Jeffries, because remember, he's that rare thing of a boxer who's actually good with money. Here's a headline you're not going to get often with respect to former boxers. Los Angeles Times, March 30th, 1920. High average price for Holstein cows. What? It says here, an average price of $901 each was paid for 71 registered Holstein dairy cattle at the annual Pacific Coast Classic Auction. You know, that's like 30 grand or 25 grand a piece for these cows. It says among the consigners to the sale was James J Jeffries of Burbank, former world's champion heavyweight prize fighter, but now a breeder of dairy cattle. 2 of his cows went to the herd of David Maxwell of Waterloo, Iowa. So he's shipping $30,000 cows all across the country. He's never out of the public eye. Like I say, he remains a celebrity. Here's a typical article, the San Francisco Bulletin of June 16th, 1925. It's a series of photographs from back in the time in Carson City, Nevada, when Corbett and Fitzsimmons were going to fight, but Jeffries was the prime sparring partner. It's just a series of photographs depicting camp life back then as it was in 1900. You know, he would appear in movies whenever they needed a boxing expert. He'd remain a celebrity in Los Angeles throughout the rest of his life. In just the same way, he'd be the Los Angeles version of what Jack Dempsey was in New York City, remaining a topical celebrity throughout the rest of his life. And did he make money? Well, yeah, he did. Los Angeles Times, November 28th, 1930, says, new tract offered in parkland. Then the city of Burbank needs parkland. And the one thing that the Jeffries has is land. So him and his brothers offer to sell a tract of land at $975 an acre for $230,000 for the whole property. That's the better part of $6 million for that one land sale. So he's doing fine. And he did fine right up until the time he dies. And here we have one of 2 obituaries here. The Ogden Standard Examiner, Wednesday, March 4th, 1953. So he would live to be 78 years of age. It says here, much was written about the career of one of the greatest heavyweight fighters in the history of boxing when James J. Jeffries died at his Burbank, California home last night. He gets into the column gets into details with respect to the Johnson fight that don't appear anywhere else. It says Jeffries and Johnson Johnson fought for a purse of $101,000 on the basis of 60% for the winner, 40% for the loser. Jeffries' end was $40,400. He was also paid $10,000 for training expenses and sold his motion picture rights for $66,000. His total, therefore, was $117,000. That's why he fought. That's why he was the great white hope. I don't think he ever thought he was carrying the burdens of an entire race on his back. He just wanted a $100,000 payday. It says here, just a few days ago, this writer was invited by Everett Saunders, California boxing commissioner, to attend Jim's birthday anniversary party at Burbank. 4 years ago, I had the good fortune of attending a similar affair in company with Jack Dempsey and other notables of sports and motion pictures. So those are the two guys, Dempsey and Jeffries are the two guys that epitomize boxing, old-time boxing at that point in time, and were sought after by celebrities and the press alike. Dempsey noted, "In my book, James J. Jeffries was the greatest champion of them all," said Dempsey. "He had all of the tools and hit like a mule. He was a credit to the boxing game and a fine gentleman. He was my idol when I was a kid, and whatever success I had as a fighter, I attribute to Jeffries." High compliment and praise indeed. They note as well, concluding that Jeffries was independently wealthy and had made Burbank, California's home for many years. Up until 2 years ago, he operated weekly amateur fights in Burbank. So he kept his finger in the fight pie, but only on the amateur basis there. The headline in the San Francisco Chronicle is former champ James J. Jeffries dies. But it says here, of note, is that Jeffries became one of Burbank's foremost citizens after establishing his home there nearly 50 years ago. His last birthdays were civic events. In 1950, the mayor declared a civic holiday, and the Chamber of Commerce staged a party at his home. So that's the level of respect the gentleman had. But he might have been entitled to even more respect. This is something that occurred just after he retired in his Squire days. It says here, Los Angeles Times, March 9th, 1953, tribute paid to Jeffries as big-hearted American. The passing of James J. Jeffries brings to my memory the colorful era and zest of LA 50 years ago. This writer was 17 years old with his family at 6th and Howard Streets in San Francisco the morning of April 18th, 1906 at 5:12 a.m. Well, what do you think's going to happen then? Well, it's when one of the greatest earthquakes in world history followed by fire destroyed practically all of San Francisco. The good people of Los Angeles were among the first to send in a relief train of food and supplies. Among those who contributed heavily in time and money for the relief efforts was James J. Jeffries, who spent the days and nights of April 18th, 19th, and 20th in a buggy on Hill Street in the middle of the disaster zone near 5th Street, selling Los Angeles newspapers for whatever they would bring for the benefit and relief of San Francisco victims. James J. Jeffries was a big-hearted, true-hearted American, and the world was benefited, in California in particular, because of his life. A fitting tribute for a fine gentleman. Everything about this man that I've been able to find is positive. The only negative is the fight against Johnson. But as I say, I think that was capitalism overcoming racism. He had already fought a black man before. He was not averse to fighting anybody and any and all comers. But I think he went a bridge too far here in trying to fight somebody 6 years after he retired and after having to lose those massive amounts of weight. Well, in any ways, he's gone now. Let's raise a toast to one of the great fighters of all time. And the drink we're going to make this time in our themed cocktail parade is a classic knockout cocktail. There's variations of the knockout cocktail. This is the classic. 1.5 ounces of gin, 1.5 ounces of dry vermouth, a 1/4 ounce of absinthe or a teaspoon of white creme de menthe. Now, because there's no juice in here, we can stir it. Remember, just get your giant mixing glass, fill it up with ice, take your long mixing spoon and stir it 30 or 40 times to get the proper dilution and the proper coldness, and then you can strain it into a chilled cocktail glass and garnish it with a sprig of mint. Well, that's it, folks. Come back again next week for another episode of the 100 Years and More show. Again, I'm the 100 Proof News Hound. Remember to like and subscribe. It's extremely important for the development of the channel, okay? So everyone, take care, and we'll see you again next week.